When Karen smashed a glass in my disabled daughter's face over unapproved wheelchair ramps, she had no idea I was FBI. The look on her face when I flashed my badge? Priceless. Fire now, she's doing community service at a disability center. Justice served. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watch. Also like and subscribe for more stories. You people don't belong here. Victoria Blackwell's shrill voice cut through the peaceful afternoon as she stormed across our front lawn, orange citation in hand. This is the third violation this week. The veins in her neck bulged as she pointed accusingly at my 16-year-old daughter Sarah, who shrank back in her wheelchair, her eyes wide with fear. This was supposed to be a small gathering to help Sarah make friends in our new neighborhood, her first chance at normal teenage socialization since we moved in. Sarah's hands trembled on the wheels of her chair. Her cerebral palsy made it difficult for her to move quickly, and I could see panic rising in her eyes as Victoria approached. The other teenagers on our porch froze, uncertain how to react to this adult woman's sudden aggression. "Ms. Blackwell," I said calmly, stepping between her and my daughter, "there's nothing in the HOA regulations against a few friends visiting. Don't lecture me about regulations." Victoria spat, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing toward my chest. Her designer sunglasses slipped down her nose, revealing cold eyes filled with disgust. "I've been president of Oak Ridge Estates for 8 years. That hideous ramp, those garden stones, the handrail, all unapproved modifications." Sarah's friends looked mortified, frozen in place on our front porch. I could see my daughter's lower lip trembling, the joy of her afternoon shattered. A girl named Zoe placed a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder, but even this small gesture of kindness seemed to inflame Victoria further. "These are necessary accessibility accommodations for my daughter," I explained, maintaining my composure despite the rage building inside me. 15 years as an FBI agent had taught me to control my emotions, even when facing the most despicable individuals. Victoria's face contorted with disgust. "Accessibility is your problem, not the neighborhood's. Your situation is bringing down property values." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the confrontation from a distance. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one intervened. I recognized their expressions, the silent complicity that allows discrimination to flourish. She gestured wildly with a glass of iced tea in her hand. "This community was pristine before you moved in 3 weeks ago. Now we have all these eyesores and this noisy gathering." In that moment, her hands swung too wide. Whether intentional or not, I'll never be certain. The glass struck Sarah's face with a sickening crack before shattering. My daughter cried out in pain as the sugary liquid splashed into her eyes and the sharp edge sliced her cheek open. Blood immediately began running down her face, mixing with tears and tea. "Dad." Sarah's terrified voice sent ice through my veins. Her friends gasped in horror. Zoe frantically searched for napkins to help stop the bleeding. Time slowed to a crawl as I rushed to my daughter's side, my training kicking in automatically. I pressed my handkerchief to the cut, noting with professional detachment that it would need stitches. Sarah's body trembled under my touch, her soft whimpers breaking my heart. Her beautiful face, so like her mother's, marred by this senseless act of cruelty. "It hurts," she whispered, her speech more slurred than usual due to her distress. "Why does she hate me so much, Dad?" The innocent question gutted me more than any knife ever could. How do you explain hate to a child who has never known anything but love? Victoria stood frozen, empty glass stems still clutched in her hand. For a brief moment, shock registered on her face, quickly replaced by defensive indignation. "It was an accident," she snapped, taking a step back. "She shouldn't have been in the way." Something inside me snapped. The careful restraint I had maintained, the professional composure I had perfected over years of high-stakes operations, it all evaporated in that moment. "Everyone inside," I instructed Sarah's friends, my voice deadly calm. "Call Sarah's doctor. Her number is on the fridge." As the teenagers helped my wounded daughter inside, I turned back to Victoria, who was already backing toward her gleaming white Mercedes. "You just assaulted my disabled daughter," I said, each word precise and measured. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Victoria Blackwell, or Ms. Vicky as she insisted on being called, had introduced herself the day we moved in. With her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and perpetual scowl, she had handed me a 3-inch binder of HOA regulations. "We maintain certain standards here," she had said, her eyes lingering disapprovingly on the wheelchair ramp I had installed. "I'm sure you'll find everything in order with our rules." I had simply nodded, too busy with moving boxes to engage with neighborhood politics. In my years with the Bureau, I had learned to pick my battles. Little did I know the battle would come to me. As we approached our modest two-story house, I noticed a bright orange notice taped to our mailbox. Sarah spotted it too. "What's that, Dad? Are we in trouble?" Worry creased her forehead. "Of course not, Pumpkin. It's probably just neighborhood information," I reassured her, though my instincts told me otherwise. The notice was a citation for unauthorized exterior modifications, the wheelchair ramp. According to the citation, I needed prior approval and had to remove it within 7 days or face daily fines. I felt my jaw tighten but maintained a calm expression for Sarah's sake. "Nothing important, sweetheart. Just some paperwork I need to handle." That evening, after helping Sarah with her homework and physiotherapy exercises, I studied the HOA regulations. The binder said nothing about prohibiting accessibility modifications, which were protected under federal law anyway. I drafted a polite email to Victoria explaining the situation and citing the Fair Housing Act. Her response came at 6:30 the next morning. "Rules are rules, Mr. Matthews. The aesthetic appeal of our community affects everyone's property values. Your situation does not exempt you from following proper procedures." My blood boiled at the word situation, as if my daughter's disability was an inconvenience to her precious property values. Still, I had dealt with more dangerous adversaries than a power-hungry HOA president. I decided to attend that evening's association meeting to address the issue directly. The community center was packed with residents when Sarah and I arrived. Heads turned as I wheeled her down the center aisle. Some neighbors smiled warmly, while others averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the visible difference in our midst. Victoria sat at the center of a long table, gavel in hand. Her eyes narrowed when she saw us. "Public comments are limited to 2 minutes, she announced coldly when I raised my hand. "And they must pertain to agenda items only." "My name is James Matthews," I began, keeping my voice level. "My daughter Sarah and I recently moved to Oak Ridge Estates. I've received a citation regarding our wheelchair ramp, which is a necessary accommodation." The gavel came down hard. As I said, comments must pertain to agenda items only. The Architectural Review Committee handles individual violations privately. "But this isn't just about aesthetics," I persisted. "It's about accessibility and inclusion." "Mr. Matthews," Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "We all have to follow the same rules. No exceptions. If we allowed everyone to modify their homes without approval, Oak Ridge would look like, well, not the prestigious community people paid good money to live in." A few neighbors nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Sarah tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, it's okay. We can go," she whispered, her eyes downcast. The humiliation on her face broke my heart. "We're not done here," I whispered back, squeezing her hand reassuringly. For the next week, I documented everything, taking photographs of similar modifications around the neighborhood that hadn't been cited, gathering support from a few sympathetic neighbors, and consulting with an attorney who specialized in housing discrimination. Meanwhile, the orange citations continued to appear. One for the garden stones creating a path wide enough for Sarah's wheelchair, another for the handrail I had installed beside our front steps. Each one felt like a personal attack on my daughter's right to live comfortably in her own home. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. Sarah had a few friends over, her first social gathering since we moved. They were sitting on our front porch, laughing and sharing stories, when Victoria's gleaming white Mercedes pulled up to the curb. I was in the kitchen making lemonade when I heard the commotion. Victoria's voice carried through the open window. "Excuse me. Young lady, your music is too loud, and this gathering was not approved by the social committee." By the time I reached the front door, Victoria was standing over Sarah, wagging a manicured finger. "Furthermore, this contraption is blocking the sidewalk," she said, gesturing to Sarah's wheelchair. The other teenagers looked mortified. Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "Ms. Blackwell," I said calmly, stepping onto the porch. "The music is barely audible and my daughter is simply enjoying an afternoon with her friends. There's nothing in the HOA regulations against that." Victoria's face flushed crimson. "I am the HOA president, and I determine what constitutes a violation." She turned back to Sarah and her friends. "This neighborhood was peaceful before you people moved in. Now we have all these accommodations, ruining our aesthetic." Sarah's lower lip trembled. One of her new friends, a tall girl named Zoe, stood up defiantly. "You can't talk to Sarah like that. She's not doing anything wrong." Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. In her hand was a glass of what looked like iced tea. In a movement that seemed almost calculated, she gestured wildly, sending the contents of the glass flying directly into Sarah's face. Sarah cried out as the glass hit her face, the sharp edge cutting her cheek before it shattered on the porch. The sugary liquid stung her eyes, and a thin line of blood appeared on her cheekbone. Time seemed to slow down. 15 years of FBI training kicked in, and I was beside my daughter in an instant, shielding her from the glass shards while checking her injury. "Dad, it hurts," Sarah whimpered, her hand pressed against her cheek. Victoria stood frozen, the empty glass still clutched in her hand. For a moment, genuine shock crossed her face, quickly replaced by defensive indignation. "It was an accident," she snapped. "She shouldn't have been in the way." Something in me snapped. The careful restraint I had maintained, the professional composure I had perfected over years of high-stakes operations, it all evaporated in that moment. "Everyone inside," I instructed Sarah's friends, my voice deadly calm. "Call Sarah's doctor. Her number is on the fridge." Once the teenagers were safely inside, tending to Sarah, I turned to Victoria. "You assaulted my disabled daughter," I said, my voice low but intense. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Victoria scoffed, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm calling security." I pulled out my credentials, letting the FBI badge catch the sunlight. "Special Agent James Matthews, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You've just assaulted a minor with a disability in front of multiple witnesses. That's a federal hate crime." The color drained from Victoria's face. It was an accident. I didn't mean to." "Save it for your statement," I cut her off. "Because here's what's going to happen now." Over the next hour, local police arrived to take statements. Sarah received 5 stitches for the cut on her cheek, and I filed a formal complaint against Victoria for assault and for violating the Fair Housing Act. What Victoria didn't know was that I specialized in civil rights violations at the Bureau. I had spent years building cases against people who thought their power or privilege placed them above the law. Within days, Victoria was removed from the HOA board pending investigation. The interim president, a retired judge named Howard, immediately approved all of our accessibility modifications and issued a formal apology to Sarah. But I didn't stop there. I organized a neighborhood meeting, not in the community center but in our front yard, where Sarah's friends set up chairs and handed out flyers. Nearly 70 residents attended. One by one, people came forward with their own stories of intimidation, selective enforcement, and discrimination under Victoria's reign. An elderly couple had been fined for installing a bench where the husband could rest due to his heart condition. A single mother had nearly lost her home due to excessive fines after installing a basketball hoop for her son. "Neighborhoods aren't about property values," I told the gathered crowd, with Sarah proudly beside me, her stitched cheek held high. "They're about people, all people with all abilities and needs. We don't need uniformity, we need humanity." 3 months later, Victoria Blackwell pled guilty to misdemeanor assault and was sentenced to community service, specifically volunteering at a center for children with disabilities. The federal housing discrimination case resulted in a complete overhaul of the HOA regulations, with a new accessibility committee that Sarah was invited to join. The transformation in our community was remarkable. Neighbors who had once averted their eyes from Sarah now stopped to chat with her. Families invited us to barbecues and pool parties. The Accessibility Committee, led by my daughter, worked to ensure Oak Ridge Estates became a model of inclusive living. Perhaps most surprising was the change in Victoria herself. Her community service hours turned into voluntary work. The woman who had once sneered at my daughter's situation was now advocating for accessibility in public spaces throughout the city. When asked about her transformation, she simply said, "Sometimes we need our worst selves exposed before we can become our best selves." On Sarah's 17th birthday, the neighborhood surprised her with an adaptive community garden plot, complete with raised beds she could tend from her wheelchair. The sunflowers she planted grew taller than anyone expected, their golden faces tracking the sun just as Sarah's spirit had always reached for the light despite shadows cast upon her. "You know what, Dad?" she said to me one evening as we admired her blooming garden. The scar on her cheek had faded to a thin silver line, a reminder of that terrible day, but also of the change it had inspired. "Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things." I hugged her tightly, thinking of all we had endured and overcome. "That's because you're stronger than any obstacle, sweetheart. And you've taught this entire neighborhood what real strength looks like." As the sun set over Oak Ridge Estates, I watched neighbors stop to chat with each other across newly installed accessible pathways. Children played together on inclusive playground equipment that the community had funded. Elderly residents rested on benches that would have once been cited as violations. Sometimes justice comes through official channels: investigations, court cases, legal remedies. But the most profound justice often happens in changed hearts and minds. Victoria had hit my daughter with glass, not knowing I was an FBI agent who could hold her accountable. What she truly didn't realize was that Sarah's quiet courage would transform an entire community's understanding of inclusion, far beyond what any badge or law could accomplish. In the end, the most powerful weapon against discrimination wasn't my FBI credentials. It was my daughter's unwavering spirit and the ripples of change she inspired in everyone around her.